Welcome to Unbind with Bindable. I'm your host, Jocelyn Getson, Chief Growth Officer at Bindable. And today's topic is an important one: choose remarkable, how to win and keep customers in the age of disruption. So really, no matter what business you're in, it's no secret that winning and retaining customers is critical to long-term success. But sometimes that's easier said than done. The challenge is that we're living in a time of unprecedented disruption. I don't even need to go into the details of that, but it's everything from digital advancements, social, economic, environmental changes. They're all impacting our lives and our businesses as we know it. So what may have worked even a few years ago, maybe in some cases even last year, is not necessarily going to have the same impact on your business today. So today's episode, we're planning on identifying the essential areas that businesses need to focus on to not only survive, but more importantly, is to thrive during these rapidly changing times. And joining me for the conversation is Steve Dennis. Steve is a leading retail expert on strategic growth and innovation. Steve speaks worldwide on how businesses can reignite growth in the age of digital disruption. He's been named a top 5 retail influencer by multiple organizations, and his thoughts on the future of shopping are regularly shared in the media, including as a Forbes Senior Contributor on his podcast, Remarkable Retail, and other media channels, Bloomberg, BBC, CNBC, CNN. Steve, the list goes on. It's awesome. And really happy to have you here today because in addition, his best-selling book is Remarkable Retail: How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption. So welcome, Steve.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, that was it's really been fantastic. We've known each other a couple of years now, just to see not only how your message is resonating, but I think how brands are really adopting and finally kind of waking up to the current reality. And some of them maybe by chance got left a little behind, but a lot of the times they're catching up and listening to what you have to say, and especially in your book. And I think where I really want to start, obviously, insurance and retail, I do feel have a lot of similar, there's a lot of similar parallels to how both industries operate, and especially how the advent of the internet and e-commerce has impacted those. So, but where I want to start is actually what does it mean for a brand to be remarkable? And why is that so important?
So I'm using Remarkable in 2 different ways. The first way is probably the way most of us think about it, which is something that is very distinctive, highly unique. The second way I've absolutely borrowed from my friend Seth Godin, who some of the listeners may know Seth, but they in particular may have checked out his book, Purple Cow. So in Purple Cow, which is, I don't know, I think close to 20 years old now, Seth pointed out how we were going from a world of scarcity to a world of abundance. And in that sort of world, it's harder and harder to even get the consumer's attention, much less their engagement, their enrollment, their purchase, and repeat and loyalty and so forth. So what Seth really put forward and what I creatively adapted in my book is, or shamelessly, depending on your point of view, is this idea that by remarkable, we literally talk about it, that consumers share the story of our brand because it is so relevant, so memorable, and so engages with them that they feel compelled to spread the story. And that's an indication both of loyalty and engagement of the consumer, but it also obviously creates tremendous amount of top spin in our marketing.
That's fantastic. I mean, that's the thing, is that there is so much noise. And so getting that customer's attention, retaining it, and then creating that advocacy, that brand advocate is a challenge, but when it's accomplished, it's really impressive. One of the chapters, and I kind of dive into this a little bit because I think it's really important, is you have one that's called "The Future Will Not Be Evenly Distributed," or will not be evenly distributed.
Yeah.
So that is really interesting because I think we think of, whether it's insurance, retail, you think of who the big players are today. And you see these incumbents and you feel like they're small, taking a piece of it. But what does it mean to you that it won't be evenly distributed?
Well, when I wrote that, I wouldn't say there was a little bit of a throwaway, but over the last couple of years, I've really come to appreciate this idea that there's a pretty good chance that what is going to be meaningful to your brand, meaningful to your organization, meaningful to your customer is probably already happening somewhere in the world. While clearly change is moving much more quickly than it did before. There's still lots of things that are going on, perhaps in a different industry, which I guess gets to a little bit why we're talking about retail and insurance on the same podcast. But
Yeah.
perhaps it's one of your competitors. Perhaps it's in another country. Perhaps it's in an industry that you haven't paid that much attention to. So having that awareness, doing the work, really understanding what is going on with consumer behavior and competitive dynamics in a broader, I call it, opening the aperture, is incredibly important, because really, if you think about it, most of the things that have become kind of table stakes today got started somewhere else. And in many cases, not only have they become a potential point of differentiation, but even more scary, I guess, in terms of keeping pace, is that they become table stakes, and then you're on to the next thing. One-click ordering or autofill, or there's a lot of things that when they first got adopted, were kind of interesting, but now they've become the expectations. You have to constantly be paying attention to what's going on in technology and consumer behavior from other parts of the world.
When you're a brand and you're you're behind, is there how do you catch up? I mean, that's a daunting thing. So if I'm, and again, any brand that's sitting there knowing that they've missed a step, maybe, and this is even a few years ago, they don't have an app. Well, you should have had an app 7 years ago. Do you even need an app?
Right.
What's the leapfrog? So how do they catch up? I mean, what does that look like? Is it hiring? I feel like they just throw money to a lot of times just to hire new people and get fresh ideas. But what does it take to really get back on pace?
Well, I'll give you a little bit of it depends answer, but I think, the starting point, if you're going to be innovative, if you're going to be, as I talk about in the book, if you were going to adopt the innovation habit, create this culture of experimentation, you really do have to start first and foremost with the culture. What I've observed working in different organizations in leadership roles, but also as a consultant over the last 30 plus years, is that there are organizations that are wired to say yes, and there are organizations that are wired to say no. Those that lead into creating more innovation, those that are constantly defending the status quo. So if you don't fundamentally have a culture of experimentation, a culture that's wired to take chances, that's really, I think, a starting point. If you can create that foundation, then a lot of it comes down to processes and habits. Are you constantly, like we talked about, are you studying what's going on with consumer behavior, creating that awareness, creating that acceptance, taking the actions that are going to get you there? Are you trying a lot of stuff? One of the things I think people misunderstand about innovation, it's really not necessarily that those companies that are great at staying ahead of the game are just really good at getting everything right. What they're good at is trying a lot of stuff and pivoting quickly and embracing those changes. So you have to really develop a different sort of process and mindset. But a lot of it, the reason why I say it depends is, frankly, for some companies, they're so far behind, I'm not sure they can ever catch up. In retail, we see particularly some of these moderate price department stores, which have, as I kind of glibly say a lot, is, really watch the last 20 years happen to them. It was pretty obvious along the way what was going to happen if they didn't make radical change. And yet most of the change they made was quite incremental. And now they're so vested in their real estate, they're so vested in their product and service offering, and they're so far behind that it's difficult to work out what they need to do. Other organizations which have more agility, that maybe aren't quite so far behind, then it's a lot easier to get your head around what it's going to take to get there.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple things there, which is the key one is listening to the customers and seeing what's happening in the world. Is that you can't be in a boardroom working off of a hypothesis or what you did a few years ago. It's really getting that new data. In our world, it's a lot of tired data scientists. Just look, the history is going to inform sort of where you're starting to lose traction and will indicate maybe where that investment needs to be made, which is critical. But I do think
can I just interrupt on that one point? I mean,
Sure.
I absolutely agree with you that is a great place, but you have to, and I hate to quote this guy because he's generally a terrible person, but you have to be careful, as Henry Ford said, that you're not building a faster horse, right? That a lot of times that, you can get into this incrementality or optimizing what you're already doing. So consumer research has to be used very deftly. One of the things, I worked with a client a few years ago that's not because of me, but they've had a lot of success really pivoting pretty substantially in their strategy. And they absolutely used a ton of customer data and customer journey mapping, studying their competitors. But to what we were talking about earlier, they also traveled around the world to see what disruptive business models were occurring, in some cases with, entities that were direct customers, but they looked at the hotel industry. They looked at other kind of consumer experiences. They look at financial services and try to glean. So you have to be, you have to build off of what you know and follow a lot of rigorous processes, but you also have to be very creative and be think about reconfiguring, unbundling, rebundling a lot of what you're doing to create the new business models of the future.
No, and I think that's key. And which brand was that? Did I miss that? Was that
it was Nike.
Nike. Yeah. Okay, yeah, because that is and thinking of, I asked what brand because that makes sense to me. When you look at the Nike brand, it's a lifestyle, you're in it, you feel it. So being able to pull from other industries into the way you're thinking, it's honestly, it's why, we're talking. I think it's so important to see how other industries have conquered some of the challenges we might be facing in our world. And I think one of the ones that stands out, and I do tie retail and insurance together a lot, because I do think a manufacturer in retail is very similar to a carrier, right? They both create a product and they distribute it through their traditional channels, which has been brick and mortar or a traditional agent channel, and very successfully so. But with the advent of e-commerce websites, that footprint expanded. And not only did that happen for their stores, and they were relying upon adoption at that point, the manufacturer was, but the manufacturer, and in this case, the carrier, now has opportunities to go direct themselves.
Sure.
But there's this consideration, which I know happened in retail as well, around channel conflict and the perception of channel conflict. And so sometimes there's this all or nothing mindset.
Right.
What do you think some of the biggest lessons learned from retail's evolution that, insurance should maybe sit up and pay attention to, take note of?
Well, I mentioned a few. I mean, I agree with you. There are a lot of parallels. I sometimes say, if you set the Wayback Machine to the mid '90s, before e-commerce was really a thing, a lot of industries, not just retail, I think insurance, but you could think of many. It was a pretty simple business. For the most part, consumers were dealing with some sort of middleman, and there was a very large local component. So success was based upon maybe having a relationship, having a unique product offering, being maybe a location, being out open the hours you were open. And then, we went from that sort of world of scarcity to abundance, where it's 24/7, incredible choice, access, et cetera. And, that is the world we're moving, we've moved to, and the elimination of boundaries and so forth. It's just going to continue. So lesson number one, we can all get caught up in channel conflict, but gravity always wins. There are some inexorable forces that even if you wish it were different, it doesn't matter, except the things you cannot change, right? The second thing is that you have to really understand where the value is created. For a long time, the middlemen, so to speak, added a lot of value. They were intermediary that could provide expertise, curation, a lot of other things that I think, whether you're talking about retail or you're talking about restaurants, or you're talking about insurance, are similar. That's become less important. So you have to think about what are the specific ways you add value as an intermediary, and not try to fight the things that are inevitably going to happen. But as we've seen in retail, well, I guess maybe I'll mention one other thing. The other thing, and I don't know so much about insurance, but in retail for sure, we've seen what I call the collapse of the middle, or this bifurcation effect, where you used to see retail across kind of a spectrum of price points and different sort of business models. But now really success is being found at either end of the spectrum, either, value, convenience, assortment driven. So whether you're talking about the Walmarts of the world or the Amazons of the world, at the other end is really more premium, where you get a high level of service, or something's really unique about the experience, and you're charging a premium price. When you look at what's happened to retail, the store closings, the bankruptcies are overwhelmingly concentrated in those retailers that didn't pick a lane. And so I think that, consumers often are either in kind of what I call buying mode, which is just I got to get this done. It's very straightforward. I don't want a lot of friction, or they're really trying to solve a bigger, more complicated problem.
Yeah.
If you're in the middle, chances are you're eventually going to be gone. So another lesson is pick a lane. We're moving to a world of much more personalization, which gets to your point about data, but how do you add value by creating more emotional intimacy, to use that term a little bit loosely, with the customer. So I think there are a lot of lessons. I certainly think we're not seeing the middleman, so to speak, go completely away, but we're seeing a pretty rapid evolution. If you don't really understand how you're adding value today and how you have to add value in the future, you're probably in trouble.
No, I mean, I think that's key. And it is sort of happening that same way in insurance, where we see, an insure tech, which is really just another, usually a monoline product, a single product like renters or home, and they see this opportunity to really take it to another level using more data to inform the product development and customize it. And it doesn't mean that customers are always paying more. In insurance, the hope would be that you're paying less or pay per mile usage, but it is I definitely agree with the pick a lane, because otherwise it's a race to the bottom on your pricing, and
Exactly.
you're never going to be successful with that. And so what is your story and how are you connecting with the consumer is just as important in our space. And it's interesting because one of the things that we're also seeing on that convergence between the two industries are certain brands that are now bringing insurance products to the customer. And in some cases, it can be creating a very relevant, timely offer, like travel insurance, which we all get offered and feel very unstably unprotecting it, like this critical moment of it's only $26. And, with COVID, it's even driving more attention to that product. But we also see brands like Petco is now selling pet insurance, and IKEA in Europe is offering homeowners insurance. So Tesla, is now creating their own auto insurance. To me, that's creating more engagement. But I mean, why do you think brands are exploring these complementary offers?
Yeah, I think there's sort of a strategic reason, and then there's a more tactical reason. I think the strategic reason is if you can kind of, for lack of a better term, solve a higher order problem, there's a chance, a pretty good chance that you're going to make more money, but you're going to make more money because you're providing a broader solution to the customer. You may know, some of the listeners may know, Ted Levitt, the marketing professor from Harvard Business School, once said, customers don't buy a drill because they want to drill. They buy a drill because they want a hole. But it's actually bigger than that, right? They want a hole because they want to put up some shelves, because they want to create this amazing, nursery or whatever it might be, right? So thinking about ultimately the customer jobs to be done, as some have called it, creates an opportunity to delight the customer more and be more relevant. And technology has evolved to the point where you can, reconfigure your offering in a way that was very hard to do in the past. So I think the strategic value is solve a bigger problem, and you perhaps get a more loyal, more profitable customer. Tactically, I think, it's so hard. There's two ways we could look at it. It's so hard to break through the noise if you're providing a very specific solution to get the customer, going back to what we started with, to get the customer's attention in the first place is incredibly hard. So if you can show up as an add-on sale where the traffic is already being aggregated or going, that can be very beneficial as a supplier. As a retailer or a provider, leveraging that traffic that you perhaps spend a lot of money to develop, or leveraging that relationship for greater customer lifetime value by providing something incrementally that's valuable, is also, on a more transactional basis, quite attractive. So I think there's strategic motivations, and I think there's just practical day-to-day tactical motivations for retailers and others exploring that.
No, and it's great to see, because I think it gives that customer that brand association. And I don't think, we've done a study before where the majority of customers would buy from a non-insurance brand. So it's also getting back to, what you said earlier about it's really comes down to what does the customer care about and where are they at, not just like how you've been running your business to date. And in this case, looking at how customers shop and buy and getting out of just insurance lane and looking at how they're, engaging in all these other areas. I mean, you can add anything to your cart, like people like you bought this, and seeing relevant offers everywhere. Why should that not include insurance when it's timely and relevant? So yeah, especially when you're the maneuFacturer. If you're Tesla, it does a lot, protects your customers. It also protects the information on losses. So there's a big benefit to keeping it all under that umbrella.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see more, and I know this term gets thrown out a lot, or it can be, misconstrued, but I think we're getting away from sort of this channel-centric thinking or kind of one-size-fits-all business model thinking to where brands are more platforms, right? Because you can leverage your relationship with the customer in many more ways than you could before, both by leveraging data to target, but just by simply, picking pieces up and delivering them in a digital fashion. Whereas before, when you're in a more brick and mortar world or face-to-face local kind of world, I mean, it just was impossible. I mean, you couldn't do it even if you had all the money in the world, but even if you had a lot of money, there's just really no practical way to do it. So I think this boundaryless, more digitized world that's data informed, it just creates all sorts of new opportunities, both defensively in some cases, but hopefully more on an offensive basis.
I love the idea of thinking as a platform, because I think that's how consumers think. You look at the iPhone and it's not really it's not a phone, it's a platform. And there's a movie my kids were watching and I watched directly, Jumanji. And in the movie, the guy's been trapped for 20 years and they keep referencing, I don't have my phone, I need to take a picture on my phone, and we need to call. And he's like, does phone mean the same thing in the future? And it's like, because it doesn't, because we're not thinking of it just as the tactical make a phone call. It is now my music, it's my camera, it's my communication, it's everything. So why shouldn't a retailer or any brand that has that engagement and that relationship, that's a trusted relationship, bring more services that they've vetted and are relevant? I mean, it's really fair to both parties. So
sure,
I love
absolutely.
that, thinking of it as a platform. So going pure retail here, what are some of your favorite brands right now? Or I don't even know if favorite's the right word, but ones that you're really watching or examples that you're using as who's either forward thinking or you just have a real soft spot for, you think they're doing something cool?
Well, there's so many. One I'll mention is RH, the brand formerly known as Restoration Hardware. And the reason why I really like them is that, number one, they have completely transformed their business in the last 10 years. People even remember restoration gallery stores, restoration hardware stores. They were, small, weird mix of products, which is kind of where the name comes from. And, they were, I think on 2 different occasions, pretty much bankrupt. And under Gary Friedman's leadership, they've completely re-energized the brand. And they've really fought against this narrative that physical retail is going away. When everybody was talking about closing stores or shrinking stores, investing less in stores, they built these gallery stores, which are, people have seen them. There are about 20 of them now and doing amazingly well. These sort of temples to home furnishings. And so I somewhat, not only are they doing well, but it's really a story of going where retail is actually moving in some cases. But their places big and small. I love some of the brands. I wrote a piece and had a podcast episode recently called "The Stores Strike Back Again," because there's some of these retailers like Best Buy and Target that people, you go back 4 or 5 years, it's like, oh, they're going to get obliterated by Amazon. And no, they're absolutely killing it because they've understood the customer. They figured out how digital and physical can be combined. They don't think about it as separate channels. They think about it as one customer experience that plays out in different ways. And then there's a lot of up and coming brands that I think are really interesting. Warby Parker, that has, picked a category, gone, with a very, it's gotten a little bit more complicated, but a pretty specific offering around a digital and physical blend and a product category that really needed a ton of innovation. So
and you can even try, I've tried my Warby Parker glasses on through my phone and through the app where you can, I mean, it really does.
Right.
And of course they have great retail spaces in Dallas. They have the location I've been into, which is fantastic, but it is, no, that's an interesting one because they just picked that one product and everyone's like, that's ridiculous. But you know, you're known for something and even Target, what I think, oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, one of the things, you know, some people may know this quote that Jeff Bezos supposedly made, that your margin is my opportunity. You know, that was the thing that really caused Amazon, which first of all, it is not really true, because Amazon has gone after lots of low margin products and still is that's not a particular, I always say, you know, it's your mediocrity is my opportunity. You know, that the thing is to find those really unremarkable, as I call it, or, you know, sort of boring, mundane categories, and think about how to innovate. And I think that's where when you look at the Warby Parkers of the world and a number of these so-called digitally native vertical brands, that's really what they've done. They've analyzed, you know, they haven't gone for all the customers, but they've gone after a specific set of customers and really innovated on, you know, aspects of the customer experience, aspects of the product design, aspects of the pricing model. They've also innovated around that. They haven't figured out how to make money yet. I mean, that's a little bit of a side note, but
the detail.
But,
I mean, yeah.
I mean, you know, sell it at a loss, make it up on volume. I think it's still apparently a strategy that people like.
Well, Amazon didn't either, right? For a long time, and that was just acceptable, I guess. Or, you know, it's the long road. But it is funny looking at even Target, the complete opposite: variety, endless aisles, you know, in every way. But I'm not personally the dedicated Target person, but I know a lot of people who that's what they do. Like that's their favorite thing. They get the Starbucks and Target collaboration because it's a mindset. It's like a Zen moment for the shopper. And I could probably stereotype that shopper, but they walk in, they get their Starbucks, they got their shopping cart, and they could spend 3 hours at Target and $400. So yes, they probably buy online as well, but it is that blend. So you know, that omni-channel or bionic channel kind of experience that it creates for the consumer.
Yeah, and I think just quickly, Target's also an example. Sometimes I think when people think about innovation, they think that it's one thing, you know, that, oh, we innovated on mobile or we innovated on product design. But Target is a great example of this alchemy. You know, it's a mix of things that in combination make them successful. You know, you have to point to really a bunch of different things that they do, you know, quite well. And, you know, and a bunch of other things they do exceptionally well, but it's the mix, I think, that is really interesting.
Well, Steve, I want to thank you for coming on today on UNBIND, and thank the audience for listening and for the support, and for everybody to please pick up a copy of Remarkable Retail: How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption. It is available on Amazon, and please feel free to follow up with Steve or myself. Steve has a fantastic podcast. Recommend you listen to that as well. So thanks, Steve.
Thanks very much. I enjoyed the conversation.